Hello everyone, I'm Maria and welcome back to my Nook. In today's video, I want to talk about all the books that I have read in September and October this year. I'm pretty excited for this video because in September, for one, I have read quite the variety of genres for my standards, and in October, I have read my most anticipated book release of 2023, and I am so excited to talk about these books with you. So without further ado, let's jump right in. I do want to mention quickly that one, I have reading vlogs up for some of these books, so I will of course link them down below if you want to check them out. And two, I do have my laptop next to me for like looking at my notes and stuff. So if I just look over there sometimes, that's why. But anyway, let's start with the first book I have finished in September, and that is The Atlas Paradox by Olivie Blake. This book is the second book in the Atlas trilogy, I believe it's called, or something like that. The first book was called The Atlas 6, and the third book is coming out in a couple of months, I believe. It's called The Atlas Complex, and in this fantasy, dark academia-ish type of world, the Alexandrian library was never actually destroyed, and there's also lots of magic going around in the world. So now there is this Alexandrian society that basically takes care of the Alexandrian library, and every, I don't know how many years, 5 or 10 or something like that, the Alexandrian Society invites a group of magicians, Medians, I believe they're called, to study at the Alexandrian Library. There's always 6 people invited, and they're like the best of the best Medians in the entire world. And then once they agree, they have to study at the Alexandrian Society for an entire year. And once that year is up, one of them gets eliminated, and the other 5 move on to be initiated, and they move on to the second year of studying. So in this book, the initiates are in their second year of study, and that's basically what we're seeing. We're seeing a continuation of the event that happened at the very end of the Atlas 6, and we're seeing them in their second year of study. One thing I do want to mention is that back when I read the Atlas 6, there had already been a huge hype about that book on the internet, so I went into that book with pretty high expectations, and when you've got such high expectations, it's kind of easy, or at least easier, to be disappointed, which is exactly what happened for me with the Atlas 6. And to this day, it's been over a year since I read that book, I still feel like I would have enjoyed that book more if I hadn't had such high expectations from all the hype that was happening. So since I had heard only like mixed reviews about this book before reading it, I didn't go in with such high expectations, and guess what? I enjoyed this book, the sequel, more than I enjoyed the first book. I did really enjoy most of the characters, in large part because of the audiobook that I was listening to actually, but like I still enjoyed the characters, that stays a fact. And I enjoyed a lot of the dynamics. There were some alliances that were freshly formed, sort of, that brought new dynamics, which I really enjoyed. And I just also really enjoyed seeing one of the characters try to figure out their magic better. That was something I really, really enjoyed, honestly. I had theories about things and everything, and the end really had me on the edge of my seat, honestly. However, this book does have some issues, like for example, there are quite a lot of characters the author dealt with, which meant that some of them were kind of missing some depth, which I think is also a bit of a result of the length of the book. This is only like 400, it's 399 pages long. And like, that's pretty short for a fantasy book. I mean, yes, it's part of a trilogy, but still, there are other fantasy books that are part of duologies, trilogies, series with like 5 or 6 books, and they're still 500, 600 pages long, which obviously gives the author more time and space to develop their characters and give them deeper layers, which was something that was kind of missing for some of the characters in this book. And then there was the issue that there was a lot of telling happening instead of showing, and on top of that, I sometimes felt like the characters talked a lot without actually saying anything. I hope this makes any sense, but like sometimes the characters held huge monologues and in the end they basically said nothing or very little, or they said things that could have been said in like 2 sentences. Plus, I sometimes felt like the author was trying very hard to be quotable, which doesn't always benefit to a narrative. Something that also really bothered me is the descriptions that were missing a lot of times, or like the depth to the world building, I think you would call it. Because, for example, these characters were at this Alexandrian society, at this manor house, 24/7. And yet, I still have no idea what this house looks like. I could name some of the rooms, yes, but like, how many stories does this building have? Does it have a front yard? Does it have a backyard? Or is it a garden that surrounds the entire house? Like, is the dining room on the first floor or the second floor? And is the painted room next to the dining room? Or are they on complete opposite sides of the house? That's all kinds of stuff that I just do not know about this house that these characters were at all the time. And that is something that really bothers me, especially as a person who always pictures things in their head. But still, I am giving this book 4 stars because I still enjoyed it more than the Atlas 6, and I gave the Atlas 6 3.5 stars back then. So I feel like 4 stars is fine for this book, even though I would say it's on the lower side of 4 stars probably. Next up, I read Sacred Hospitality by Olivie Blake. This one is like a prequel novella short story that happens before the events of the Atlas 6. So it's in the same series, and I listened to this via audio because it was included in the audiobook to the Atlas Paradox that I had borrowed from my library. And in this novella short story thing, we are basically just seeing the 6 initiates from the Atlas 6 in random situations in their life before the society, which I actually really enjoyed. It gave us a bit more insight into the characters and what they were like in just random situations in their day-to-day lives before the society. And I also really loved the format of the whole thing because it was written in the way that screenplays for a theater play are written. So it was like Act 1, Scene 1, location so-and-so, characters so-and-so. Act 1, Scene 2, location so-and-so, characters so-and-so, and so on. I really enjoyed that. However, I am not going to rate this short story novella, not because it's that bad or anything. I just said I really enjoyed it, but I figured out or realized that I find it kind of hard to rate novellas and short stories properly, because it's kind of hard to judge them sometimes because they're so short, you know? But still, I really enjoyed this one. Now we have a book that unfortunately I do not have a physical copy of, and that is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This book is a different genre than what I typically read. It's a thriller mystery book, and I believe it's an adult thriller with some horror elements even. I saw Haley Pham raving about Riley Sager for months by now, and I had been wanting to read a Riley Sager book for basically as long as that. And then I saw Katie is Reading talk about Home Before Dark, and I was like, this book sounds pretty cool. So basically we have Maggie, who 25 years ago lived at this manor house called Bainbury Hall with her parents for I think only about a month before they just up and left in the middle of the night without packing anything, without ever coming back. They just left. And then her father, who is a writer, I don't quite remember if he was an author or a journalist, but he was definitely a writer. He then wrote a book about their experiences at Bainbury Hall, because this house is said to be haunted, cursed, all those sorts of things by like people living in that town and people living in other places too, because a lot of bad things have happened in that house already. And for 25 years of her life, this book has basically haunted Maggie, because everyone was always asking, what was it like living in that house? Are the things your father wrote true? Yada yada yada. So now, for certain reasons, Maggie goes back to the house in order to discover whether the things her father wrote were true, or if not, what was actually going on in that house, or what is actually going on in that house, what actually happened to them while they stayed at Bainbury Hall, etc, etc. And this house, let me tell you, it is so intriguing. It's basically its own character, honestly. I loved this book. I enjoyed it so much. It was so gripping. I really enjoyed the gothic, spooky, kind of eerie atmosphere and the vibes that it had, and obviously the thriller and mystery aspect of it all, trying to make up theories and trying to figure out what happened, how and why and who and everything. It was so much fun reading this book. The notes page I have for this book is basically an essay full of theories and thoughts I was having while reading this book. It was so much fun. I do want to mention that even though I personally believe that I can be spooked easily, like I normally stay so far away from anything horror, I was able to read this book at night. Like not at night, but rather shortly before going to sleep, and I was fine. If anything, the thing that kept me from sleeping was basically my brain trying to make up more theories about what's going on in this house, you know, but not really the spooky aspect. So if you're afraid of books that are too spooky for you, maybe you'll still be fine with this book. Of course, just still check out trigger warnings, for example, and stuff, but like I was fine. So that just as a side note. I really enjoyed the plot twists too, and just as I already said, I enjoyed everything so much. It was so gripping and intriguing, and I was on the edge of my seat most of the time basically. Two things I didn't really like about this book though were, one, that I was barely able to build any mental images of most of the characters. I think you've already gathered that I'm a big mental image girly when it comes to reading, so this kind of really bothered me, because for a lot of characters there were only certain details mentioned multiple times, but other things about their appearances were just maybe, if at all, mentioned once and then never again. Or like characters were described when they first appeared, but then they didn't reappear for like the next 150 pages or so. And do you honestly think that by then I will still remember what they looked like? No. Usually in, for example, romance books or fantasy books, you often get small reminders of characters' appearances without them being annoying. Like, authors will just be like, she tucked her dark brown hair behind her ear, or like, his sharp chin dropped to the floor, you know, something like that. And you will be reminded that this character had a sharp chin or dark brown hair. But I kind of felt like none of that happened in this book. Like, I could not, for the life of me, describe the main character of this book to you. I could not. There are certain characters that are basically just like a floating apron and spectacles in my head, or like they're just a Rolling Stones t-shirt and muscles in my head, because that's all that was continuously described about them. And like no descriptions about their hair color, their hair length, their face structure, their posture, their height, etc, etc. Okay, their height sometimes, I think, but like you get my point probably. And then also the second thing is that in this book there was often a bit too much telling, but not in the way that there was so much telling and no showing. There was showing, but then also telling after we had already been shown. I remember multiple moments where it was shown what a character did, and then instead of leaving the reader to think for themselves and interpret the actions of the character for themselves with the context of the situation that was provided, the narrative told us what the action was supposed to mean. Like, just a small quote: a bit of ash drops from Hannah's cigarette onto the kitchen table. She doesn't brush it away. A small act of rebellion. It's described that she doesn't brush the ash away, and you could leave the reader to then interpret themselves that it's an act of rebellion or like something like that. I know it's a bit hard to interpret that from the quote alone, but like with the context of the whole scene, I personally felt like it was easy to interpret that, and yet still the narrative also told us, and I was like, I already got that, thank you. I don't need to be told as well, you know? That kind of bothered me a little bit, and I don't know if these two things are simply Riley Sager's writing style, because I haven't read any of his other books, but I might read other books by him, so I'll probably find out then. All in all, I still really enjoyed this book and the journey and the experience I had with it though, so I'm still giving it 4.5 stars. The last book I finished in September was Love Theoretically by Olivie Hazelwood. This book made me so happy. Olivie Hazelwood is one of my absolute favorite romance authors, and I enjoyed this book so much. I read it right after the thriller I read beforehand, so this was a great change, and it was just so upbeat, and it just made me so happy. What is this book about? It's basically about Elsie, who works in the science field, but in order to get by financially, she also has a side job as fake date. Basically, she's pretending to be somebody's date for like family gatherings, work gatherings, you know, stuff like that, where people just think they don't want to show up alone, and she'll be pretending to be their date for one evening. And she has this rule to never go out on such a fake date with the same guy multiple times, but for this one person, she continues to pretend to be his girlfriend. And he has a brother. Now that in itself is no problem, but Elsie applies to a job in the science field, and guess who's on the interview committee? the brother of the guy she allegedly is dating. And now a lot of issues are coming up. And this book was just such a delight to read, honestly. I love Ellie Hazelwood's writing style. I love the characters she writes. I love the dynamics she writes. I just love everything about her books. And as always, I had the best of times with this book. I was kicking my feet with happiness. The end of this felt a tiny bit rushed in order to like tie up all the loose ends, but honestly maybe that was just me because I read the last 80 or so pages on a day on which I was quite exhausted, so maybe my brain was just computing a little more slowly. I don't know, but all in all I am still giving this book 4.5 stars. I just love Ellie Hazelwood's books so much. Now we're moving on to the first book I finished in October, and this one is my most anticipated book release of 2023. It's The Fragile Threads of Power by Byyee Schwab. I have a super long reading vlog of this book up on my channel, so go check that one out if you're interested in a more in-depth thought and feeling and all that. It's like very long. It's the longest reading vlog I've ever done because I just did not shut up about this book. But I will try to keep it short in this video. The notes page for this book is like so incredibly long. So incredibly long. I don't think I've ever written more notes on a book I've ever read, honestly. It's also easily my most tabbed book ever. Ever. And after finishing this book, I just had to sit and like stare at the wall for 5 minutes because I just had to let it sink in that I'm done with this book now. And I just didn't know what to do with myself for hours and days afterward because it's kind of sad to know that it's just over now. I've read the book now. I'm done with it, you know, but it was still such an amazing reading experience. So basically, this book takes place in the Shades of Magic world, and it happens 7 years after the end of A Conjuring of Light, which is the third book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. In this world, there are 4 worlds that are basically connected at one point, which is London. So London is like parallel London. There are like 4 parallel Londons. Red London, White London, Grey London, and Black London. Only certain people can travel through the worlds, and those are blood magicians. They're called Antari. In this book, there is basically the issue of an organization, a movement type of situation that wants to see the King of Red London gone, because they think that he's responsible for the magic in Red London and the country of Red London decreasing. So they basically want to overthrow the king. There are a lot of characters in this book that we already met in the Shades of Magic trilogy, which made me so happy, but there's also a completely new cast of characters. For example, Tess, she's on the cover. She can see and manipulate the threads of magic, of the world basically, which in my opinion is such a fascinating magical power to have. I just love that idea. In general, I love this book so much. I had really high expectations for it and I was not disappointed at all. I loved every second of this reading experience. I went through all the human emotions available to me, basically. I was sad, I was heartbroken, I was crying, I was happy, I was giggling and laughing, and I was on the edge of my seat, and it was just the best experience. It reminded me so much of how much I love this world and these characters and how much I care for them. And once again, I just love V.E. Schwab's writing style so incredibly much. It's so good. I've been editing this video right now and I just wanted to add something about the Fragile Threads of Power, or actually V.E. Schwab's books in general. It's that there's often a really good representation of grief and mental health issues or mental struggles in general, like struggles with feelings and stuff like that, which I personally like a lot about V.E. Schwab's books, because she often manages to put things and feelings into words that I sympathize with, or that I myself understand, because I've felt those things before or experienced those things before, but I've never really been able to put them into words like that. So that is also an aspect that just really speaks to me about V.E. Schwab's books and the Fragile Threads of Power as well. Also, speaking of that, please check out the trigger warnings for this book. That counts for every book though. The world building is amazing. The characters are built and written so fantastically, and the dynamics are so... I just love everything about this book and about this world, and I am giving it 5 stars easily. And now the last 2 books I am going to talk about right now are Spy Family Volume 2 and Spy Family Volume 3 by Tatsuya Endo. I read both of these in a reading vlog as well, and I'm just gonna talk about both of them together quickly. So in this series we have this spy, his codename is Twilight, and he received this mission to like keep an eye on this, I think he's a politician. But in order to do that, he basically has to create a fake family. He has to find a fake wife and a fake child, and then enroll his fake child in an incredibly prestigious academy in order to like get close to the son of this politician that he wants to keep an eye on. And it's all about world peace and stuff, you know? I honestly really enjoy these 2 volumes of Spy Family. I enjoy this series in general. It's just so kind of wild. There are some things happening in these mangas, by the way, they're mangas, that are just like, how is this happening? Why is this happening? It's just so wild. You really can't take them too seriously, I think, but it's just so much fun. I'm laughing out loud all the time. I love the characters so much. The little girl, the fake child, Anya, is so cute, and also I'm looking for little romance crumbs all the time. I don't even know if there's ever going to be romance in this series, but you bet I'm looking for it. So overall, I just really am enjoying this series, and I'm definitely going to continue it as soon as I can grab the 4th volume at my library. However, I am not going to rate either of these volumes because of the same reason that I mentioned with Sacred Hospitality. I realized that I find it kind of hard to rate novellas, short stories, graphic novels, and mangas, because I don't know, they're just different, you know what I mean? So I feel like I'm not going to rate them anymore, except for when I really want to give a graphic novel, a manga, or short story, or whatever, a specific rating. Then obviously I'm gonna rate it, but otherwise, no. I just really enjoyed these books though. Hi, I look a bit different, wearing a different sweater, and oh my gosh, the earrings, let me just show you these cute bat earrings real quick. I acquired these today and I just think they're so cute. I had to show them to you. Anyway, why do I look different? It's because it's a different day, and that is because I thought that the books I just talked about would be all the books I read in September and October, but I actually finished another book in October, and that is The Tournament at Gorlan by John Flanagan. This is the first book in the early years duology, which is part of the Ranger's Apprentice world, basically. This early years duology takes place before the events of the original Ranger's Apprentice series. So it takes place before the events of the Ruins of Gorlan, the Burning Bridge, etc. And the thing is that in the original Ranger's Apprentice series, there are certain events that are talked about or like referenced sometimes because they are quite historical events or like historically important and impactful events that resulted in certain things that still had consequences in the present day. Does that make sense? I hope so. The thing is just that in the original Ranger's Apprentice series, it's been like, I think 16 years or something since the events actually happened. So they've become a bit blurry. The accounts have become a little exaggerated, maybe. They've become a bit of a legend, and like the details have become a bit lost, you know, things that just happen to historical events when time passes. But the early years series shows us those events and what actually happened, and it shows us everything that happened and like all the details. So that is basically where this first book started. In these events, there is this Baron, Lord Morgarath, who's one of the barons of Araluan, and he wants to overthrow the king, basically, or he wants to get onto the throne. And to do that, he set up a quite complex scheme, actually, that's been going on for years before this book even started. And now the Ranger Crowley and the not yet Ranger Holt try to stop him, basically, and that's where this book starts. I think I really enjoyed this book. There were a lot of characters actually, which I enjoyed at times, and at other times it was kind of hard to keep track. I really did enjoy that we saw more rangers and we really got to know more rangers and more different types of rangers, and we saw their dynamics between each other and stuff like that, which in general is something that I really enjoy about these books, like the friendships and the dynamics between characters and the humor. Like, some of these characters have such good humor. Some of them are like so sassy and have such dry humor, which I really enjoy though. And even when the stakes are pretty high, there's still some humor sprinkled in here and there, and friendship being seen and stuff like that. And that's something I just really enjoy about these books. And also the fact that they're just such easy and cozy and relaxed reads. It's not that the stakes are never high, but I just feel like I can really kind of relax my mind and fall into these Ranger's Apprentice books. They're just kind of cozy reads, in my opinion, even when the stakes are high, which I really enjoy about these books. Now back to the point I already mentioned, that there are a lot of characters in this book, at least I felt like there were, and sometimes it was a bit hard to keep track of them. Like, there were quite a few rangers to keep track of, and then there was Lord Morgarath, who had like a secretary of sorts, and then there was another guy involved in his schemes, and even his horse was a character at some point. And then there's another baron who had a secretary, and his horse was like the baron's horse was a character too at one point. And then there was also a knight and his horse who were a character for some time. and where I had to like try and remember like who's the horse and who's the knight. And then there were plenty of other barons, and sometimes names were only mentioned like once or twice, and I had to try and figure out like, do I have to remember this name? Are they going to appear again, or is this a one-time situation, you know what I mean? On the other hand, I've already heard that reading the Ranger's Apprentice books can be so much fun because it's like a big crossover between so many books and so many series, and characters appear here and there and everywhere. And I really noticed that in this book because it was the first time I actually like strayed from the original Ranger's Apprentice series. And it was a lot of fun to see characters from the series I'd been reading so far appear in this series as well. That brought me a lot of joy, actually. I am definitely looking forward to continuing the early years series and like the Ranger's Apprentice books in general. So I think I will give this book 3.75 stars. I keep comparing Ranger's Apprentice books to Ranger's Apprentice books because I don't really know how to compare them to my other books. So it's hard for me to compare them to my other fantasy reads, so I just compare them to each other, you know what I mean? I'm just going by a gut feeling here. Honestly, now I really do think those were all the books that I have read in September and October. If I do manage to finish another book in October, I'm going to talk about it now. I almost cannot believe that I am saying this, but I actually did end up finishing another book in October. Not in a million years would I have believed myself capable of finishing another book in October. And honestly, I only just managed that because I finished this book on October 31st. So this is definitely the last book I read in October. But before we talk about that, I just want to quickly mention the next really cute earring set that I bought recently. These cute ghosts. I'm so excited to be wearing these today. But anyway, let's jump into the review for the last book I read in October, which was One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This was the October monthly buddy read for the Patreon of Katie is Reading. And in this book, we follow the main character, Elspeth. Elspeth lives in this place called Blunder. Blunder is basically cut off from the entire rest of the world by this mist. In Blunder, there's basically two types of magic. There are these so-called Providence cards, and there are different types of cards. Each card grants the holder a different type of magical ability, but each card and each magical ability also comes with a different type of cost. And then there's the second type of magic that people receive after a fever, an infection that they go through. And this magical ability also always comes with a certain type of cost. And this magical ability is also seen as illegal, basically. It's seen as like an ugly scar that is left on somebody after an infection, and people are literally being hunted by the royal guard of the king, the Destrius, when they're infected or when they have magical abilities because of an infection. And that is honestly a concept I found really interesting right from the start. First up, the fact that this is like so double-sided, that there are such double standards in this society, that one type of magical ability is seen as good and fine and okay, and another type of magical ability that nobody asked for is seen as something ugly, something that needs to be punished, and something that people are hunted for. And then also the fact that all magic, every single magical ability comes with a cost, and sometimes very, very steep costs. I thought that was so interesting, especially compared to most other fantasy novels where magic is something that belongs to the heroes, that people crave to have, that people long to learn and stuff like that. The writing style in this book felt very flowery and wordy at first, and I had to get used to that at first. I had a few issues with the world building here and there, and I know I'm not the only one, because there were some details missing. Because this place, Blunder, is sometimes described as the town Blunder, sometimes it's described as the kingdom Blunder. So I'm like, is Blunder really just a town? Is it like a small town, or is it a huge city? And is this actually the entire kingdom that the king rules over, or is there more to it? Or is Blunder like Morocco, like a one town kingdom situation? I don't know, and that bothers me. So I felt like a map would have been really great, but other than that, I thought the atmosphere, the vibes of this mist and the castles, and there were ruins and all that type of stuff was amazing. The forest, the woods and everything, so good, A+. Then I also thought that this monster living in Elspeth's head, called the Nightmare, by the way, that was also incredibly interesting. Like, he was such an interesting character in my opinion, even though he was the monster, you know? By the way, more to the plot, Elspeth then meets the captain of the Destriers, which are the royal guard, and then gets sucked into this whole scheme and secrets, and there's a lot of plotting going on, and you know, stuff like that. I can't really talk about too many details. Elspeth is using her magical ability, and obviously there's a cost to that. Keeping track of time was a bit difficult here and there in this novel. Sometimes, obviously, it was mentioned that like a character woke up at dawn, and then I knew, okay, so a day has passed. But then other times, a character mentioned like, it's been a week since this and that event, and I'm like, I'm sorry, what? When did that happen? When? And then other times, I just literally have zero perception of time in this book. So I felt like that kind of bothered me because it wasn't just that I didn't have an exact perception of time, but in this book, sometimes I really had zero perception of time. I did like the romance in this book, even though I felt like I would have almost wanted there to be a bit more build-up, because at one point it felt like things were going a bit too fast, at least for my taste. And that kind of resulted in a little bit of depth missing, in my opinion. In the end, I didn't absolutely love this book like I thought I would in the beginning. Like, when I started reading this book, I thought this would maybe even be a 5-star. I was flying through this book. I finished this book in 6 days. Like, there was not a single day of me reading this book on which I read less than 50 pages. And that is something that has not happened with a full-length novel in quite a while. So I was literally flying through this book for my standards. But still, at the end, I felt like it's maybe just a 4-star. The writing style started feeling a bit off at some point, and after finishing the book, I realized that it felt a little emotionless at times almost. As if the narrative was just blankly stating events without much emotion, you know what I mean? However, I did definitely get attached to some of the characters, and I started really caring for the characters, even though they might have started out as like the bad guys, possibly. I would have also liked to have a bit more depth here and there, especially for some of the side characters. And maybe we're getting more depth in the second book, you know? I still like them and I enjoyed them, and I had really strong feelings toward certain other characters. I thought the magic system was incredibly interesting. I was definitely invested in this plot, and I am definitely going to read the sequel. I actually ordered it already. It's called Two Twisted Crowns, I believe. And I'm actually pretty much looking forward to reading that book. I really want to know what is going to happen next. Maybe some of the things about the plot were a bit predictable, but I honestly thought it was fine. So yeah, overall, I think I'm going to give this book a 4-star rating. Maybe a bit on the lower side of 4 stars, which might sound a bit too high for all the things I criticized about this book. But like, at first I thought it might be a 5-star, and then I started seeing some issues with this book and downgraded it to 4 stars, because in the end I still really enjoyed this book and the characters and everything. So I think I'm going with 4 stars. But now I am going to give it back to Outro Maria. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Feel free to like and subscribe, and maybe let me know down in the comments if you have read any of the books that I have read in the last 2 months. Or maybe tell me what you guys have read in September and or October. What was your favorite book in September or October? There are your choices, what you can tell me in the comments, or you can just tell me anything else you want to tell me, honestly. So other than that, I will see you guys somewhere else on the internet or in my next video. Bye!